This is the Weigh In podcast, and on this week's Takedown Thursdays, we talk about Cowboy Mania. What have the Oklahoma State Cowboys been up to? And also, we're going to bring to you who's the best looking team in this offseason in terms of coming into next season for wrestling. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at that. So, one thing that we have to get after and touch is what these Oklahoma Cowboys have been up to. So when you look at what Cowboys have been up to, when you talk about what has Cowboy wrestling been doing, what has been going on. So first biggest piece that we're going to bring to you, the biggest piece, Braden Thompson staying in Stillwater. That is big, big, big. Now, also, Cowboy RTC was able to add Lee Rober as the coach coming all the way from UNI. So when you look at that, and you look at, I understand that's an RTC guy, but you're telling me that guy's not gonna have a little bit of movement in that in that in that regular room, that NCAA room, same room, but for that NCAA team, because you look at Gilman has left. We already know that. The question here is, what happens to who do they add? Who do you add to replace Gilman? And that is the biggest question yet. That is a huge question. Who replaces Gilman? And in other words, you look at that and you say, okay, there could be many candidates to replace Gilman. But when you really double it down, we talked about earlier in the year, Cowboy Wrestling wanting to be, at the top, the pinnacle. First year, you get a team trophy. The season after you get the team trophy, you start stealing a bunch. I mean, I don't say you stole. I think they already wanted to be with Taylor. I kind of think some of those Penn State wrestlers that left, I kind of think it was more of a situation where I think David Taylor might have told them, hey, stick out this year. Don't just leave because I left right away. Stick it out. See if you really still like it after I'm gone. If you don't, it is what it is. And then they're transferring up to Okie State. So when you kind of look at that, you kind of think, okay, with that being said, and with Kale's group he's getting, and with the way recruiting going, that it's kind of it's kind of not one way anymore. You had Bo Bassett go to Iowa. You had so many more. You know what? The best thing you do here is to pull it up. Let's pull it up. We're going to pull it up. So I know I saw that at some point this week. You're right. So you had PJ Dukes go to Penn State. Marcus plays Penn State. Bo Bassett goes to Penn State. LaRon Lockett, Oklahoma State. Jack Forrest, Oklahoma State. Now, as we already know, we talked about him. Boy Knox, Cornell. Jude Correa, Cornell. Seth Mendoza, Missouri. Deshaun Ross, Okie. DeLuca, Iowa. And, Alessio Peretin, Cornell. So with just getting off to, some of the happenings, when you kind of look at what's what, when you look at that, what's what, you kind of get across this here of, okay, when you just look at that big top 10 list, for who's been top 10, you look at Oklahoma State's got 3 of them. You look at Iowa's got 2 of them. Penn State's got 2 of them. Cornell's got two of them. You look at the group that the Oklahoma State Cowboys are bringing in, and you have to ask yourself, it is it only a matter of time before they take a team title? Yes, and I think I've said this before on the pod. If not, I'm going to say it now. I think the year Okie State takes the team title, I don't think they're going to just take one. I think they're going to take it going ahead all the years going forward, because the way this is going to go for David Taylor, because look, it was sad to lose Gilman, but sight unseen, same thing. Gilman probably feels there's more wrestling left for him to do. So that's great. We can all squash the rumors of Kyle Dake, because Kyle Dake said he wants to do 4 more years of Olympic level wrestling. So Kyle Dake is in no way, shape, or form the replacement. But with what's being said, and what's happening here, who's that replacement? Because that could be all the big difference. Because this Cowboy coaching staff, when you thought they couldn't add anybody, they get the guy from UNI that has been there since 2015. So, that should kind of tell you he's been there for a long time at UNI, and now finally says, I like what's going on at Oklahoma State. And when you look at that RTC room, it's a good RTC room, because we already talked about, we got Zahid Valencia in that room. You got Roman Bravo Young. You got Fix in that room. You've got so many more in that room for the RTC that you're kind of saying even that takes an effect. If you roll around some of those guys, I think one of the things here to talk about is Cowboys are not just building a group for tomorrow. They're building a group for tomorrow, the day after that, and the year after that. They're building a group that when they finally take a team title, they're not just going to take it that year. They're going to take it the year after. They're going to compete the year, because you look at how good that group is and how Kale's getting good recruits. He's getting, excuse me there, David Taylor. David Taylor's getting good recruits. Kale is too. Don't get me wrong. Kale is getting good recruits, but David Taylor is also chomping at the bit, because you might have seen a lot of guys go to Penn State. You might say, hey, it's a great school. Well, no, I get a chance to meet David Taylor. I get a chance to roll around with David Taylor, world champ, multiple time, Olympian, and all these things, and many more. I can't name all of them, but many more. You say, oh, David Taylor is, I want to be able to roll around David Taylor. That's great. You learn from David Taylor. Now that Taylor's out of there, are you all still going for Kale? Because remember, now we got one big thing that wasn't there when Kale was getting David Taylor and Kale was getting, all these guys. Ed Ruth, my guy Ed Ruth, I was a big Ed Ruth guy. NIL. Now you're adding NIL into the mix. And now it's about, okay, can Kale offer you as much as maybe the brands can, or as much as David Taylor can now? So now you look at how NIL has had, and I don't say it's a negative effect. That's where I say, it just contributed more to what I call the wrestling draft. But either way, shape, or form here, when you talk about that, adding NIL, now you have that dissatisfaction of NIL. So when you have that thing of bringing in NIL, now you're telling a guy, now you're sitting down in a parental meeting with the parents or the athlete, if he's there himself, hey, I can offer you X amount of dollars NIL. How does that sound? No, that's not going to work, because they say, well, David Taylor offered me X amount of dollars NIL, and that's way more than what you're sitting down to offer me. Well, what? You understand where I'm saying, hey, there's that positive or negative effect of NIL. So when you really go about that, but even if you bum it down a lot more, it's more positive than really negative. And I say that because there's just so much more that has been able to affect what goes on. So when we get down to the building block, what I call the building block, the basics here, it's just that's an effect. But when you look at this off-season building group of of the Cowboys, you say they're building a good group. Give David some time to build. Start getting some of those good recruits and build. Because look, they took a team trophy last year, and he was just in his first year as a head coach, and that was a good group. And now you get national champ Richie Figs, so that's a whole separate thing. This early look at his lineup, you've got Troy Spratley, All American, 125. Now you've got Richie Figs, Natty Champ, 125. So the question is, who you bumping up? Because if you really look at that lineup, you got Ryder from Penn State coming over. Braden Thompson says he's not leaving. He's not leaving. Now you've got several others also that have done so. And then you've got a plethora. Well, not a plethora, but you got a good few of incoming freshmen now that are easy top 10. Easy top 10. So now you're looking at this group and you're saying, that's a strong group because you have a lot of experience in those upper weights, got a few Penn State guys coming over. So now Kale's losing some of his guys, and don't get me wrong, he had it. Kale had some good offseason findings too. Don't even get me. Kale was able to get a huge offseason finding as getting a wrestler coming from Ohio State. So, some huge offseason stuff, when you look at it. So even Kale's been busy. Even it's been busy Kale, so when you kind of look at it, it's been even a busy Kale when you talk about it. So, there's just been so much going on about, all that. Rocco Welch. He's got another NCAA. Rocco Welch was an NCAA finalist. You got another finalist. So you're picking up those points because, the name of the game in college wrestling is all about the bonus points. I say that because that's what's going to make the difference. How many bonus points do you get? Bonus. And I say that because that's what matters the most is all those bonus points. Because everybody knows if you can get all your wrestlers to place and wrestle back, you're gonna finish nice. You're gonna be up there. Like that dream. I believe, don't quote me on it, but I believe it was that dream Minnesota team that ran, and they didn't have not one national champ. I believe that they didn't have not one national champ. I believe that year. So you talk about it's going to be real the difference. But that group that Taylor had this year was really good, and that Nebraska Cornhusker group was really creeping up on and I say creeping up because the difference was between could have been between multiple upsets. But if you look at this, now he's got Richie Figs. So Richie Figs would have scored for David. So now you look at that, extensively, we could break this down with the what's it called? With the interactive bracket that was posted. We could take ourselves and break it down like that and look at the bracket and change and say, okay, this is how the race would have looked. But look, in all honesty, here it's a good David Taylor group now, and it's a growing group now because you look at Kel Sanderson. Yes, they got bigger than they are, but remember, Starachi's gone, and a lot of those guys are gone. When you look at some of these young guys, they're getting beat. It's not that same Kel Sanderson, 7-8, or 6 or 5, where you have a plethora of guys in the final. It's not, it's not that big plethora. There were a good set of guys, Penn State in the final, but as we learned, nobody is safe from the Okie State Cowboys, and not even Gable Steveson. Because remember, we talked earlier in the year about Gable Steveson and Wyatt Henderson took him out. So it tells you what David Taylor and that coaching staff is doing is they're doing something right because Gable Steveson went down. And that is something that, Gable's a nice nice wrestler. I don't think, me. I was a Wyatt Henderson, Okie State. We were rooting that Okie State on this pod, you know, you know. So with that being said, you look at all of that and when you're looking at all of that and you're talking about all of that, you kind of think, okay, what what was the difference? The difference maker is that David Taylor coaching staff. That is a good group. You added now another great guy to take over, not take over, but to help with the RTC. That's just going to be a strong group. You're going to see them start to get stuff because, listen, the kids that are looking to go there are going to, you have to look at the basics. They're looking to get multiple national champs. David Taylor was able to get this year his first two national champs in his first year. Listen, there are going to be many more, and they're just going to say, we're looking to get a team title. And that's what we're reaching for. And you're seeing one of the best guys, I think many would agree with me, Bo Bassett. Bo Bassett didn't even go to Penn State. Bo Bassett decided he wanted to go to Iowa. So, you know, that should tell you right there that, when you overcrowd Penn State, and I say overcrowd because when you have so many, these young guys coming in, these freshmen, incoming freshmen, that's what I'll say, these incoming freshmen, they want to start. They want a mat spot. Not everybody wants the red shirt. Some guys like Paul Bassett, they want to start. And if they feel that at Penn State it's too deep for them to be able to start, I know some would say, well, they shouldn't worry about that if they win the spot. I know, but you also go what's best for you. So you think about that and you think, the way the landscape is shaping, and you say, well, it's going to get real interesting because when you look at what's going on right now with Okie getting the guys you're getting, Braden Thompson coming over, them getting, Zach Ryder, uh, with that happening and all the guys that are coming to be Cowboys, you know, and getting Alex Fundungo. And you got Richie Figs, you got Zach Ryder, Alex Fundungo. You got guys. You got guys at this point. And then now David Taylor shows up, and now you got a guy who, White Henderson wins the Hodge. So now you got your first not for you for your first Hodge trophy of David Taylor's era coming to Okie State. And now you say, okay. And you say, okay. Now you got a Hodge over there. So now it's a start or something. And I think they're going to knock off Kale. It's not going to be something where Kale thinks he's going to be untouchable. No, I think Kale is going to get knocked off. Kale's going to get knocked off. Whether it happens today, tomorrow, as in, you know what I mean. Today is in next season. Tomorrow is in the season after, and so forth. But I do believe that this Okie State group, if David Taylor gets it, as we talked about, I mean, we say it all the time, going out as you're trying to wrestle your best self or being your best self in all aspects of sports, if you go out and be your best self here, and I mean this, if David Taylor and, with Richie Figs and gets that lineup right with Zach Ryder and Alex Mondongo, and you get that lineup right, let me tell you, it's going to make a difference. It's going to make a huge difference because the minute Kale gets beat, and I say this like with my true belief, the minute Kale Sanderson gets beat, I think is the time. I think that's the time where there's going to be either two choices made in that room. There's going to be many two choices. Is it just another loss and you'll get it next year? Or are some of those final chapters of Sanderson closing? And I say that because I say, more than likely it's the first one. They're going to say, hey, you lost this year. We'll get it next year. But if David Taylor and that group does what I think, he builds a group the way I think he's going to build it, and he takes the next year and the next year and the year after that and starts building almost a Kale Sanderson dynasty. you start to think what kind of reshaping that's going to take. And I think when that takes it, I think you're going to see a lot of your best level Olympic wrestlers start to want to take over the helm of certain programs. Because this is, I mean, you already see some of them want to coach and this and that. Obviously, we see, you know, and, obviously, most could say we had Coleman Scott take over NC State. I mean, the Tar Heels, not NC State, Tar Heel, you know, Chapel Hill. But you look at and I say this with, great level of respect to all involved parties, Coleman Scott made a mistake. He left that to go think he was going to get the job at Oklahoma State. And I think you can't assume that they're just going to give you a job, that you're lining yourself up saying, hey, this is, I'm the next guy in line. I was a former Cowboy, but you can't admit, even me, I'd say it myself if I was the AD. You see David Taylor's name hit the list that he's interested. You can't pass up an opportunity on that. But what we can say is, would Coleman Scott have brought in the transfers that came through? Like, Wyatt Henderson, Dean Hamady Jr., like so many that said, I think there's something building over there. Would Coleman Scott have brought that? And I'm going to tell you just flat out, no, he would not have. No. To my belief, no. There's no way Coleman Scott would have brought those guys that David Taylor brought and been able to put them in the positions that David Taylor was able to put in and bring the coaching staff. First of all, Coleman Scott would have never brought Gilman. Let's start there. And you think Zach Ryder and Alex Fandango now, and whether Richie Figs would is, but some of those Penn State guys are coming over. You think they would have left for Coleman Scott? No, they would not have. So you look at that and you say, okay, they made a decision that was best for the team and the guy that was going to do the best thing. Okay, we've all seen Coleman Scott over at the Tar Heels. In that time, how many team trophies did they get? Now, I don't have an answer for you for that. I don't have an answer for that question, which I should, but I don't. How many, this is just to formulate your own opinion because I'm not going to sway. How many team trophies did they get in that year? How many did they get? Bringing yourself back to Oki and saying, I want the job. I think this is great. Would that have been the best successor of John Smith? No, because remember, John Smith was a great Olympic level wrestler, very well up for his bid at the Hall of Fame. One of the, so John Smith was a great wrestler. So it tells you David Taylor, he might not have been a John Smith level Olympic wrestler, but let me tell you, in his NCAA career, he was a pair of beating some great people, in his senior level, post-college career, he's beat some good level people too. Might even his friend Kyle Dick has beat some good people too, So when you look at that, the question I say to myself is, I understand now, right now, at the time, Jordan Burroughs, I bring this up, Jordan Burroughs is not trying to take over any college program, but if that ever became a thing, that won't only just be mania. That will be the biggest shocker of the world. But, I kind of see Jordan wanting to still coach his children. And I kind of think that's why I don't believe Jordan will try to helm a program. But I think the best thing to say to ourselves here is, what's going to make the difference? What's going to be the difference maker here? You know what I mean? Like, what's going to be that difference maker? Like, what's going to just, fist to fist at this point, hand to hand, what's going to be that thing that's going to be the difference maker? And I think here is in 4 years when Kyle Dake takes over, because I know he said he doesn't want to do anything now. When Kyle Dake either joins the staff or because if Kyle Dake was to turn around, let's say he doesn't helm a program, he joins David Taylor. I'm telling you something. something's gonna brew. So where Kyle Dake lands in his 4 years after he finishes his Olympic level, you know, it's gonna look interesting. Where a lot of these guys start to land, and you know, I think for Gilman's coaching career, I don't think it's over. I think Gilman's gonna come back and want to coach again. I just think it's got to be, it's got to be the right time for him. And with that being said, when you look at some of those very well Olympic level wrestlers, they're going to build some teams. And I don't foresee KO being at Penn State forever, but he will be there a longer than enough time, and I know that. But will he be there long enough to be beat by David Taylor? And that's the question you ask yourself. You know, I think he will. I think he will be there long enough for David Taylor to at least beat him once at least. You know, if that doesn't happen. But I do think that even when you find somebody to take over that program, you wonder if that'll draw David Taylor back. So you wonder if David Taylor will leave Okie State and say, hey, now I have a time to take over Penn State. Because if you beat Cal at least once, you say, well, nah, that's the guy that I need to take. But the true testament here is how this next season is going to shape out, because there's been a lot of moves. And you know what? Let's bring one more program here. As you talked about Coleman Scott and them Tar Heels. I understand Coleman Scott is no longer the coach of Tar Heels. But Ramos and company, because we know Tony Ramos is inside that coaching staff. They got AJ Ferrari over there. And you know what? They also have Chenzo Joseph, too. Now, as I believe Chenzo Joseph's is I believe his position is recruiting coordinator. So it's real interesting to see. As I'm taking a look to see, Chenzo Joseph's over there is a nice pickup. As I'm gonna go here and take a look. So when you look at that, they got AJ Ferrari. You have Tony Ramos. Now you got Chenzo Joseph. When you look at that group, when you legitimately look at that group, you know that I think that is a good room for AJ Ferrari, because all no, no nothing against where he was, Cal Baker State. They did a great thing for him. Will they ever get another All American? Who knows? They will, but you know, in this next 4 or 5, who knows? Anything can happen, as we learned from Wyatt Henderson taking down Gable Stevenson. Nothing's untouchable. So when you kind of look at this, you kind of say, okay, is North Carolina the best room right now for AJ Ferrari? And I believe that was a solid choice. Cal Baker State. That's why he wasn't a national champ. It kind of held him back a little bit. But I do foresee AJ Ferrari, if Carolina will be able to get him right. They'll be able to get him right. I see him with another national title. Now, his brother, I'm gonna be honest with you. He's got to trust himself more. Angelo. I believe it's the brother Angelo. I'm gonna go ahead and check that before I go on and tell you the wrong guy. I believe it's Angelo. Yeah, it is Angelo. It indeed is Angelo. I stand by this, and I will always say it. Angelo Ferrari beat Dustin Plott. Gabe Arnold, not it. They should have. I would have, and I understand it was Angelo that I believe. Don't quote me on this. It was Angelo that wanted to redshirt, but He looked good. He looked good. I'm not saying, I'm not gonna say he would have had the national title, but he looked really solid. And I know why he redshirted because you want to all about them natty titles. I understand it. So I'm not against why he did it, but I definitely do think that he could have trusted himself a little more there, and he could have trusted himself a lot more, and I feel like that was something that he could have done, and I think that was something that you got to trust yourself more because when you're in the hot seat, as I call it the hot seat, the hot seat. You know, you wanna very well in all pretenses you want to win a national title, but you want to do it where you think it's the best thing for you. So when you look at that, you want to do what's best, and then when you look at that, the best thing that wanted to be done was for Angelo was to not take this year and wrestle, and I understand that, but just to be told, taking down Dustin Plot, that surprised me. I knew Dustin Plot was pretty good, but it surprised me. That was a really good Cowboy group that came this upcoming season, and I think this next group is even better when you look at it. You got Richie Figs, you still have some of those young guys like Troy Spratley who All Americaned, and you've got Zach Ryder, you got a few couple Penn State guys that have shown up, and I think when we do that, you know, that is the truth. That is the truth. You know, that is the real rolling truth here when it comes to that those situations of the group. That's the one thing I say. You know, I say that that's the best taught thing when it comes to talking about the group and getting to some of the stuff that needed to go. I think that was amazing. That was a good, there were good things to that, and I think that this is a year where I knew that I thought that the Cowboys, if they did their best wrestling, they could possibly contend for the national title. I was wrong in that sense, but I wasn't wrong with them getting a trophy. They did come away with a trophy, so you know I gave myself a pat on the back and said, hey, I'm doing something right, in this analytics of wrestling, because coming from being a wrestler to now doing all these analytics and like saying, okay, the best percentages, best chances this happens, watching a ton of matches and getting in to do the stuff for you guys on the pod, is just absolutely amazing. It's just absolutely amazing. Um, just one of the amazing things to do, because when I started this year, I didn't expect myself to, I knew that, doing this streak would be really hard, video after video being put out and getting that done. And when it started, I will say that the streak has boosted mental confidence here. Mentally, I felt like, all right, is every episode good? Is it, you know, have I done a good episode? Could I have done better? But with the streak, I felt like, okay, I'm putting out. I feel like each episode I'm getting better. Some not so much, but I feel like I'm bringing the best content I can with you guys, and following the Okie State Cowboys is this is the start of following the earliest, best, what I feel is the earliest next biggest story of college wrestling. As David Taylor builds this over the years, the one thing I'm going to be able to look back and say is I saw it early. I was supporting it early. So with things like that being said, we keep up our boxing content for you guys on those Tuesdays. We keep up our takedown Thursdays for wrestling, and we're just gonna continue keep up the content. Even though NCAA wrestling is over, don't worry. We got senior level wrestling where we're going to be able to talk about a lot of that. So, as Final X goes on, the shockers and the wheres and whens and the whats are going to come out. We'll be on that. So don't, a lot of that content's going to continue to go. So with that being said, that is this week's Takedown Thursdays. Um, you know, I won't give you we'll return to the regularly scheduled program this time because, you know, again, there's no time frame on when the regularly scheduled program will come back. So for that, I would just tell you this is the weigh-in. Like, comment, subscribe if you like it. We're trying to grow with fans. And, just to be honest on the analytics of our channel, to just be real honest with you guys, we get about 25 views a vid, which means that's a solid growth, and that's a solid 25 fans, 25 true supporters at every video. Some videos, they don't all watch it the same day, but 25 true supporters that we have, and that truly means a lot to the way, and that we're growing 25 true. So many YouTubers say you got to start somewhere, and I don't really consider ourselves a big YouTuber at all, but you got to start somewhere. So having 25 people that really, grow off of it, really great, So that being said, like, comment, subscribe, and say it again, like, comment, subscribe, share, and this is the weigh-in by Benoit Chestnut and normally Sebastian Romero, but we'll get back to that. Weigh-in out.
The way in where stories